From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The Sedgwick County DA says Kansas has a shortage of attorneys, and it's time for Wichita to have a law school. Also, Kansas lawmakers are considering a bill that would require parental permission before students change their names or gender identity at school. But first, early in-person voting begins next week in Wichita's school bond election. We'll discuss campaign tactics and the challenge of convincing voters the $450 million plan is worth the money. Join us right now for Kansas Week. Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. There's just over a week to go before voters will decide whether to give the Wichita School District another $450 million for facilities. The plan that's on the table right now would tear down some buildings and build new ones to accommodate declining enrollment. It would also keep the property tax rate at its current level for an additional 20 years or so. KAKE's Nick Nelson first reports on some of the campaign mailers that have caused confusion.
It's an investment in our future. We've had deferred maintenance that needs to be taken care of, and we teach in buildings that have problems that we need to address and get fixed.
Ron Hobart is a union president and teacher who spoke in favor at Monday's school board meeting of the $450 million bond being proposed by Wichita Public Schools, which is set for a vote on February 25th. Voters are continuing to make their voices heard as both sides continue campaigning. Several voters in recent days have received mailers that look like this. A partially filled out ballot application with a return envelope addressed to the Sedgwick County Election Office. It's unclear where the mailer came from, but Sedgwick County election officials say it's not from them.
We've had a few emails asking if we had sent that out, and we've had phone calls throughout the day asking about it, confused voters asking if it's from us, and it's not from our office, and we do not send out unsolicited ballot applications.
Deputy Election Commissioner Rick Riggs says while he won't speculate on where it came from, he wants to assure the public there are ways to tell if election office mail is legitimate.
Anything that comes from our office is clearly marked that it's from the Sedgwick County Election Office, and it will have an official election mail logo on the envelope.
Tune in for an in-depth discussion of this $450 million facilities plan Monday night at 8, right here on PBS Kansas. We'll have a 1-hour special hosted by Pilar Pedraza. In the meantime, we will discuss a little bit here right now, also with Kansas State Board of Education Representative Betty Arnold, Wichita Eagle reporter Chance Swaim, publisher of the Cowley County Courier, Traveler David Seaton, and Harvey County Now managing editor Adam Strunk. Thank you all for joining us. Betty, I'll start with you since you're on the state school board and a former USD 259 board member. There's nothing illegal here that's been done with these ballot applications that have gone out. Am I correct?
No, I'm not sure how to address
Okay.
that, the legality.
Okay, I might be.
Yeah, you probably have more about that
It's a
legality.
bit of a tricky question.
Yeah.
All the
Go ahead,
campaigns
Chance.
were confused on whether the legality and the disclosure requirements. I will say, like, the application itself, if you get a ballot application in the mail like that and send it in, you'll get a mail ballot. It's not like that's invalid because it didn't come from the election office. You may be sketched out about who sent it, but it doesn't mean that it won't count as long as you're sending it to the election office, not to some strange organization that just wants to collect your information.
And let's make a discernment here that these are not ballots. They're ballot applications that people are receiving. I've received, my household has received these ballot applications in the mail every election for the past 10 years at least. So this isn't the first time this has happened. So, Betty, tell me your thoughts. Tell me your thoughts on what's going on here with the USD 259 bond issue.
Well, this is going to be a challenge because there is so much confusion surrounding. There are still so many unanswered questions. Now, personally, I support the bond issue. There are a lot of advantages to keeping buildings up, instead of looking at this as a transaction. Students have to perform at this level before we will give them this type of building. That really should not be the determining factor. It's the needs. When we look at the fact that the population has shifted, it has declined in certain areas, there would be some advantages to building schools where the largest population of students still exist. Factors such as transportation cost, factors such as even teacher recruitment. If you have a choice of working in an up-to-date building with all of your needs being met, why wouldn't that attract teachers? So it's more to look at than just the cost. There are a lot of factors. Yeah.
Understood. The vote no, and Adam, I'll move to you. The vote no argument seems to be that buildings aren't the problem. That's their slogan that they're using. Tell me your thoughts there.
Well, I mean, I can see a lot of different sides on the issue. I think what she pointed out with teacher retention, because in Kansas, it's not like it's easy to get teachers. It's really difficult. If you do have an easier time with teacher retention, you have an easier time hiring people, you have maybe better educators or more experienced educators instead of people their first year out of school, that can be helpful. I mean, transportation times, cutting down the time kids are on the bus, some of that makes sense to me. Now, I don't 100% agree with the idea that if we build new schools, our scores will go up. But look at, from the district's perspective, how do you invest in the students? Because you're capped at a certain amount you can spend, you're capped at what you can raise on your taxes, and they're the only local government that has to take any kind of debt they take on to a vote. I bet people in Wichita would have loved to have a vote on a bunch of large projects that the city spent a pile of money on.
And you were talking a minute ago before the show about Newton. You're from Newton, and they're passed.
So I've went through, I think, 3 bond issues while running the paper in Newton. The first 2 failed, and then we passed a very, very small one, which was really to save the front of a building, which was falling off, and then they've made other improvements. And I will say, I don't think we're better off for failing our 2 bills. We came out against the first one because we thought it was a poor use of tax dollars. The second one was actually a pretty decent bond, but the well was kind of poisoned already. And when we're talking about what Newton was facing, they were facing good-sized tax increases. This wasn't keeping the mill levy the same. This was, do you guys want to spend another 10 mills to upgrade this because your high school's in a really bad shape? And so what Wichita's facing is actually a lot different from the communities we cover, because we have a lot of different communities, Sedgwick, for instance, that was willing to raise their taxes, not just keep the mill levy the same, to improve their district. And you see a lot of these smaller districts that are willing to do that. So, I mean, voters need to weigh what the benefits are if they want to save another $100, $200 a year or not, versus try to move these schools around. But I do think that it is important to invest in your facilities, because otherwise you get behind on it. And what Newton deals with, I mean, you've got Andover, you've got Goddard, you've got Valley Center, you've got all of these districts around you passing a bond issue, and you get further and further behind.
Jared, I think what's sketchy about the mail ballot applications is that people don't know why they arrived, they don't know who sent it to them, and then they also have a flyer outlining why you should vote against it, right? So that adds to the confusion that's out there, right? And there is some evidence that this is illegal, because I think you're supposed to disclose who the ballot applications are from, and some of them are already partially filled out, which is also illegal, but it's apparently a very minor crime. And it doesn't comport with the state legislature's sort of push for election integrity recently by limiting mail and things like that, and as Chance was talking about earlier.
The County Election Office used to, by default, send out mail applications. That has ended in the last couple of years after this sort of panic over vote by mail. And so I don't think there was as much confusion back then, because you had one already and you're like, well, I already filled one of these out. this
And
is
it
trash.
clearly said you were the election commissioner, you know.
So that's a huge change for people. I
Adam,
think.
you were wanting to say
Well,
something.
no, and I think that's again, another issue and a large issue. We don't have enough time to talk about it, but it is a willingness to actually, like, if you care about election integrity, okay, like, let's make the system more transparent. Let's make bigger fines for people who don't say who's paying for it. Like, let's try to at least allow the public to see who's trying to buy your vote. Because if you get a mailer in your ballot, in your mailbox, they're trying to buy your vote has value, so at least you know who is trying to buy your vote and what return they're getting on their investment. And that's something we don't see. I mean, we've got a bill again in the House today where we want to hurt the election, the Ethics Commission, and kind of make that harder. And that stuff hits reporters like all of us because, like, it's really hard work, but it's really good work to try to track where all this money is going. And we have less and less and less, or fewer and fewer and fewer tools to actually track where this money is going every single year.
And when you talk about money, this is something that's really critical because the student population has been declining.
Sure, yes.
Wichita Public Schools. And there's often this point of they're moving out to Andover, they're moving. Why? The facilities. So
Newer schools, better facilities. Yep.
Better facilities. And I can remember when serving on the local board and we were opening a new building, and I asked this little kid there, well, what do you think about this? And he said, you know, this building just makes me want to act better.
Well, hey, that's good, yeah.
Well, and there's also the build. That's where a lot of the new builds are as well.
Yeah.
You know, so you have the more wealthy, middle class, affluent crowd moving to where the building is happening.
Right.
So there's this whole infill problem as well. But
Yeah.
while we're on topics,
Yeah.
it'll take too long.
Right. All right. Definitely a good discussion. The election day is February 25th, by the way. Kansas lawmakers are taking up a bill that would require public school educators to address students by the names and genders listed on their birth certificates. That is, unless their parents say otherwise. Cake's Jocelyn Schifferdecker takes a look at this controversial issue.
Gabriel Padilla teaches math for Wichita Public Schools. He says his goal has always been to create a safe space for his kids.
If a student doesn't feel safe in my classroom, then it's really hard for them to learn math, which is what I'm ultimately there for.
That's why he is against this bill, Senate Bill 76, which would require Padilla and any other school employee to call a student by the name and pronouns on their birth certificate, unless a parent specifically writes otherwise.
When a student comes up to me and tells me that they want to go by a different name, it's more of they feel comfortable talking to me and wanting me to treat them just like we want to treat everybody else.
Padilla doesn't only feel strongly about this bill because he's a teacher, he's also a transgender man. He says his teachers years ago gave him that safe space.
Having that ability for a teacher to see me as who I am is why I became a teacher myself.
Monday afternoon, Padilla was one of about 25 people who spoke to lawmakers about the bill at the state capitol. Brittany Jones with Kansas Family Voice is for the bill, saying parents should know everything going on with their child.
There are a host of parents who have found out only afterwards that this information was being withheld from them as their child was being transitioned in school without their knowledge.
Elise Flatland also talked to the committee. She says as a mother of 2 transgender children, this bill worries her because she says it threatens her children.
This bill represents another harmful attempt to marginalize and disrespect my family and puts the mental health of my children and others like them at risk.
Betty Arnold, again, I'll start with you since you're in the school category. Ms. Jones there made an accusation that our children are being transitioned in classrooms. Is that really happening in our school classrooms?
Now, I actually cannot tell you this is what's going on in classrooms no more than what I would hear.
Do you believe that's happening in our students' classrooms, though?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't have enough information. I've not gone in to observe. I'm hearing this is happening. I'm hearing this isn't happening. I think that for me, the larger issue is what is this all about? Why are we focusing on this? You talk about students falling behind. Wichita kids, 259 students, are not up to par. We look at, they can't read, they can't do math, yet we bring in other issues that really don't deal with the sole purpose of education, which is to teach our kids. And that's more where my take on a lot of this. Are we creating hurdles and obstacles that interfere with student learning? Yes, there's a lot to be said about students feeling safe, students feeling welcome. That is critical. We've tried to address many of those social problems that serve as obstacles for learning. And then we turn around and we create others. So my concern would be, just from the perspective, what are we doing to further education? Are we hurting it or are we helping it?
So being a member of the state school board, do you believe this bill that's currently going through the state legislature right now is a step in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Okay, and I would have to answer that just as a member of the public. I can't represent the state board
Understood.
of education. I feel like it's another obstacle.
Okay.
I really do.
Understood. Chance, chime in here.
What are the mechanics of this as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, it has to be the name that's on your birth certificate.
So what about Chuck? And
Yeah,
what about
right.
Jimmy?
Nicknames.
And what about Rabbi and Bobby?
Right.
So are they going to enforce all of that, or is it
Actually,
just kids?
If you read the bill, there is some language that tries to address like names that they have been referred to, commonly referred, or something like that. So there is an effort
So
to
does
try
that-
to address that.
Does that just
but-
make it meaningless, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what,
But
because
I'll give you,
No, because
but
they can
Jared,
still point out and go
Jared,
after
I
the kids
will-
that are a little
I'll
different.
give you my,
Right,
I'll give
exactly.
you my take on this bill. I think this is my opinion. I think this is another attack against a marginalized subgroup of people to generate, fear and for score political
Discussions.
points.
So we're not talking about other issues.
Is this really a problem, or is it a solution
worse
in
than
search of a
political
problem?
Yeah.
I know there have been lawsuits in other states regarding school policies that require teachers to use, the names that the students ask. And so I guess it is an issue. It has been an issue, but it really seems like it's unnecessary for the state to come in with a big club and tell every school district what to do. Yeah.
When you look at the fact that you're saying, okay, you have to do this, but you don't have to do this. It's a give and take. If we get a letter from your parent saying, this is what we want, then it takes all of the whatever out of it. So what is the point?
It's
What
cast
does
as
it serve?
parental rights, advocate for, but you can imagine a situation where parents and their transitioning child are in conflict and have difficulties, and maybe there's a foster child. So why get involved in the middle of this? Let the school handle it the best they can.
And since we're all in agreement on this, I'm going to try to go on the other side and kind of like try to think and have more of a perspective on like why I would do this. Obviously, the legislature cares about the outcomes of the students. That's what they're doing this for. Okay, let's think about this. Well, my question is, if a student lives in a household where they feel more comfortable talking to a teacher about what they're going through and what they're feeling rather than their parent, does that really benefit the student? Because that might not be a real safe household.
Yeah. Understood.
well, and it kind of goes back to this whole issue of like compelled speech, which was the thing it sounds like they're trying to tackle is like, we don't want our teachers to have to call people by the pronoun they want. You have to call them this. It's the exact same thing. You're forcing a teacher to do something that they can use their own discretion to do.
Yeah.
And then where are the teeth in this? What's the penalty?
Right. Is this meaningless?
Yeah. I mean, it's another waste of
Theater.
Political theater,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Apparently, a parent could sue the district if they violate the policy.
Understood. All right, we'll move on to our last story today. Kansas' only law schools are currently in the northeast part of the state. The Sedgwick County attorney says that creates a bit of a disadvantage for other areas of the state when it comes to recruiting new lawyers. KSN's Zena Taher reports a law school in Wichita might benefit South Central Kansas in more ways than one.
Sedgwick County Commission approved a 7% raise for attorneys at the DA's office in September. That's already helped fill about half of the 19% of positions they had open when they were asking for that raise. Now he wants the applicant pool in this area as a whole to grow. He says that he wants a law school here in Sedgwick County. Lawyer shortage is a problem in Kansas.
We are at a crisis.
Sedgwick County DA Mark Bennett blames a lack of people in the field, particularly outside the northeast corner of the state.
There's four-year colleges all over. There's only 2 law schools in Kansas, and it's in Washburn, in Topeka, and KU in Lawrence.
Bennett says 65% of the state's lawyers are located in 5 counties around the Kansas City area.
99 counties in the state are fighting over the last 20% of the lawyers.
He says a law school or satellite campus would allow more people in the southern half of the state and rural areas to consider the career as an option. One private practice says the move could expand their applicant pool and resources.
It will furnish lawyers at law firms in Wichita with student law clerks who can help reduce the prices of having to have all the research and work done by lawyers charging full fare.
For public defenders, more lawyers could help, but generally lower pay is still a main challenge.
It's hard to match the pay parity, especially when you're recruiting newer attorneys right out of law school.
Discussion about a law school campus is still in the early stages, but Bennett says it's important to have those conversations. Bennett says he'd like to see resources like virtual or evening classes in order to make classes more accessible and allow people to work as they go through school. He says he'd like to have a graduating class by 2030, but realistically it could take until 2035 to make that happen. Here for you, Zena Taher, KSN News 3.
Adam Strunk, I'll start with you. What are your feelings here?
If you build it, they will come. No, we actually wrote an editorial a couple weeks ago about how we are seeing shortages in rural communities. Like, we have one county that couldn't get someone to run for DA. Like, it is something that rural Kansas is seeing, but I actually don't hate the idea of a satellite campus in Wichita for one of these law schools, but I don't know if it's going to address the problem he thinks it's going to address. Yeah. Would it be beneficial for some companies that have an employee that they want to put through law school or training or job training? Yeah, it would. Like, I think that might be if you're settled and you don't want to drive up to Washburn or relocate to KU. I get that. But I don't think that there not being a law school in Wichita is why someone in Greeley County, Kansas isn't going to law school or then getting a law degree and then not locating back to Greeley County. Like, the point is, this is indicative of a larger issue because we write stories about this all the time. There's no doctors in rural Kansas. There's no lawyers, nurses, business executives. Sorry, there's a song there.
I wonder if they could, like, you know what they do with medical school? You know, you get scholarships. If you go back and practice in a rural community, maybe they could do something similar with the law school. But Adam's right. Our county, fairly rural county, has a real problem with the lack of attorneys. In fact, the school district couldn't find a local attorney to help to represent them and have to just use the state board. And there's other examples of that too.
Back to the symptom, it's like, well, why don't these kids who live in these communities then get educated, come back to these communities? And that's a soul-searching question that nobody ever wants to have. Some of it's just economics. Like, you have less people needed to work farms. You have less needs for jobs out there. You have no longer a need there, and then people move out. And some of it is like, well, what communities are we creating? We talked about schools. Well, if I'm going to start a family, I put this money in to get a degree. Like, I want to move to a community where I have a good school. Healthcare. I want to move to a community where if I have a heart attack, it's not a 20-minute ambulance ride. And it's like, it's those issues that we're unwilling to, like, we just say, well, we got shortage, we'll build a law school. I'm not making fun of, like, that idea. I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm just saying I don't think that doing it would have the impact that's hoped for.
It's probably not too late for Adam or Chance to go to law school if the journalism thing doesn't work out.
Or I got to about be a lawyer to stay a journalist nowadays.
Chance, tell me your thoughts.
I mean, I think as a person who grew up in Wichita, went to public schools in Wichita, went to Wichita State, if there were a law school in town, that would have been a serious consideration. I mean, Washburn and KU, they do seem a little bit far for some people. But we have had a law school in town before, a private law school, the President's College, that students went through. There was they paid, they went to their classes, they got their degrees, but it was never accredited, so they couldn't take the bar exam. It kind of went, there's a whole history behind this, but if it's attached to an accredited school, that's the main thing. Like, if this happens, it has to be legitimate.
But you also have to take into consideration that if that's the case, do you have any idea how many more people would be interested?
Yeah.
You know,
Right. That's the point, too.
that does not change people that would be interested. If you really wanted to become a lawyer, you would become a lawyer. So the real problem, I'm not opposed to it, but the real problem is, why are people not entering into law as a profession? Same thing holds true. I'm going to go back to teachers.
Sure.
There's a shortage there.
Yeah.
Could we say, well, there's a shortage because we don't have adequate colleges around the state that's preparing them? That could be an answer, but I don't think that's totally what's going on.
Go ahead.
And I
Adam.
think there's a larger hop in, like, what lawyer positions are we seeing shortages of? Because when I went to school, they said, don't be a lawyer. Everyone's becoming a lawyer. There are lawyers coming out of our law schools. They're just not going into where we need them, which is public defenders, which is district attorneys, and then it goes back to a pay issue. And I don't want to argue that we need to increase pay, because, like, that's a thing on the tax burden. But, like, you can't get people to run for district attorney because they make so much more in private practice.
Right.
Like, you can't get people, why would you be a public defender unless you're just trying to help people,
Yeah.
because you can make so much money everywhere. So, like, again, it comes back down to pay and why people aren't taking these jobs.
And I guess my question too is this, because of the comments of the district attorney, Mark Bennett, will this turn into an ask for taxpayer dollars
It's gonna have
to
to. How are you going to
fund?
support a satellite campus?
And how is that going to be received by the community? I mean, there's already this controversy over what's happening in downtown Wichita now with a culinary school and things like that. So
I think people would love it.
You think people would love it?
Some people.
Okay, all right.
But I don't know. You know,
Well,
I'm trying to balance it out here.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, I think it would be beneficial.
I mean, the idea of adding a sort of larger group or class of potentially more affluent people and families to fill these positions at need is a strong persuasive argument to make. I mean, Wichita, if it wants to be a, you know, sort of not world class, but a real city, it needs a law school, right?
That's true.
There are some weird legal questions in this city.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my thinking was, back to the argument from earlier, when I was going to college, I couldn't wait to get out. And, you know, I wanted to go as far. I couldn't afford it, quite frankly. And, you know, so I had to stay and went to Wichita State. But, I mean, a lot of students, young students coming out of school these days, I think they want to get away. They want to go to Topeka or Kansas City.
Yeah, and it comes back to affordability. Maybe like you're at law school isn't like what you're going to in college. You go to pre-law and then you go to law school. Some people get married, some people start a family, or some people want to train out of a different career. I think in that case, if there's money there or a willingness, like a satellite campus would be beneficial to serve the largest populated county in Kansas. That said, I don't think it's going to get people out doing law in Western
And I
Kansas.
have to add something on too, real quickly. When you take a look at those students that are in law school, where are they going?
Yeah.
KU Washington, where are they going? Are they staying in Kansas?
I have to cut you out. That's a wrap for this week. Thanks to Betty Arnold, Chance Swain, David Seaton, and Adam Strunk for their insights. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.